us.
Thank you for having me.
You've got quite an inspiring and interesting journey. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, for people who don't know much about you, just in terms of what you do now.
Well, my name is Isaac Wright Jr. Today, I am a licensed practicing attorney, and the author of my first memoir, Marked for Life.
It's been quite a journey for you, hasn't it? Wrongfully convicted of being a drug kingpin,
Yes.
kingpin, and sentenced to 70 years plus life in prison. I mean, that's quite a stretch, isn't it? How did you get to that point? What happened?
Well, during the time when I was arrested, the country was a different country back then. The United States was a little bit different in the sense of how it formulated laws and the reasons behind those formulations. This was a period where there was what you call a war on drugs that was taking place in the United States. And as a result of that war on drugs, there were laws that were enacted that gave police and prosecutors wide power and authority and discretion in both arresting people and charging them with crimes and convicting them. The unfortunate result of that, one of the unfortunate results of that, is that it also breeded corruption. And that corruption revolved around the forfeiture laws that was a part of the war on drugs. Those forfeiture laws allowed the government to come in after accusing you of a crime and just take all your wealth, take all of your property, and to ultimately auction it and use that money to perpetuate that war on drugs. What wound up happening in a lot of respects is that this leeway corrupted the very core of the establishment, where prosecutors, their offices and law enforcement were confiscating other people's wealth for their own gain. They were confiscating the wealth. They were putting the property up at auction, having their friends go and bid on it. And it was a huge, deep pocket for the prosecutor's office and for law enforcement in general. And that was just a snowball rolling down the hill. It became a no holds bar situation where, setting people up for crimes that they didn't commit, planting evidence, that was something that became normal course. And ultimately, it really destroyed an entire generation of a group of people in the United States and their families.
Unfortunately, you happen to be one of the victims that fell into that. You were convicted wrongfully, sentenced. But the interesting part is, whilst you were in prison, you actually then started studying up on the law and familiarizing yourself with with the process in your case.
Yes.
And even getting, I think, you more than 20 inmates out of prison as well, whilst you were in prison, with, I understand, only a high school diploma. I mean, how do you do that? I mean, the motivation. Of course, you were fighting for your life, or the mental strength that would have taken. I mean, what was that like?
It's very hard to describe. There was a lot happening, a lot of destruction, a lot of havoc, a lot of chaos that surrounded me in my personal life, in terms of those things that was going on the outside with family and friends and loved ones. And then there was the danger and the violence that surrounded me as a part of me being in a maximum security prison, where just about everybody there had forever. Nobody, where I was at, almost no one was going home. And so it was a situation where there was no regard for human life. There was just anger, violence, and hopelessness. And so amongst all that chaos, there was an innate need inside me to stay focused. And I can recall the day that it happened, because it wasn't something that was just there. It was something was that had to be found, that was inside me, but I didn't even know it was there.
Hmm.
Um, there were two threshold moments for me in prison that took me on that road that ultimately led to my release. One was when I discovered I had a gift. Um, it came to a point where no one wanted to help me. No lawyer would come in and fight for me. They all wanted me to plead guilty and take 20 years for something I didn't do. The system in the United States is set up in a way where, you're separated from family and friends and loved ones. If it's not your attorney, you're alone. It's not that they don't care for you or they don't love you, they don't support you. It's just that they can't do anything for you in terms of your situation and getting you out of the situation, except maybe chip in, for an attorney if that's what it takes. So in my situation, I didn't even have that because no attorneys would really help me. They did not want to pick up the gavel. They did not want to pick up the sword. They did not want to roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty, um, because of the power that was against me was something that was very, very intimidating. And it was their career before it was my life. That was more important. So I wound up having to do this on my own. I wound up having to make the decision to be my own attorney, not knowing anything about the law, like you said, with a high school diploma. But I went up to the law library and I picked up the first book. And the moment I read the first paragraph, it was like I had been doing it all my life. There was something that happened, um, where I understood that this was something that was different. And, that was one of the blessings, is that I had something that I never know I did.
Mhm.
And fortunately, it was a gift in law, which was the very thing that I needed to get out.
Yeah.
And so that was turning point number one. The other turning point dealt with all, of the chaos and the havoc that was going on around me, the destruction of my life. My life was just falling at my feet. And it was a very trying, mental and emotionally trying time. Impossible to stay focused. And I remember representing myself, I was writing my first motion, and I believe it was maybe 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I kind of fell asleep in my cell with the papers on my stomach. I might have woken up maybe an hour after that and realized that, I had fallen asleep. So I tried to pick up where I left off. And as I was reading the documents that was laying on my stomach, I didn't even recognize it. I mean, it was a fresh read, and it was so full of pain that I couldn't even read it. And so I knew that if I couldn't read it, I wasn't going to be able to get a judge to really read it and take it seriously. And so at that point, I realized that I had to really become someone else. I had to detach myself uh, mentally and emotionally from what was happening to me, and literally become a third person so that I could stay focused and fight my way through this plight. Thank God that was another successful endeavor, probably the hardest one, but I was able to successfully switch it off and become someone else and gain the focus that I needed, along with the gift that I had for the law, to eventually 7.5 years later, vindicate myself and get freed.
The television series For Life is actually inspired by your story. And on
Yes.
that series, you see Nicholas, who plays you, who, his character is basically a representation of you. And he gets his law degree in prison, but that wasn't the case for you, because I think I've heard from, some research that you were actually investigated
Yes,
even when you came out of prison.
yes. So in when we were actually putting together, uh, and I was working with the writers in the studios to put together For Life. There was so much depth and so many nuances to the story, that they had to find a way to condense it, in order to maintain some of the meats and bones of what happened. So one of the things that they changed is how I got my law degree. So Nicholas, in playing the character Aaron Wallace, he got his law degree while he was serving his time in prison. unfortunately, the road for me was much, much more difficult and much, much more tragic. Um, I didn't even start pursuing a law degree until I was released. So I did 7.5 years in prison. I then, on as a free person, right after coming out of prison, did 7 more years in college. I had to do 4 years undergraduate and 3 years law school. And I graduated from law school on time and passed the bar. And then what happened is once I passed the bar, usually it takes a couple of weeks if you have nothing on your record. And if you have some blemishes, some things on your record, it usually takes a couple of months, at most 6 months. Well, even though I was exonerated, even though I was released and it was clear that I was set up and wrongfully accused, they investigated me for 9 more years before giving me a license. And so when you add it up, 7.5 years in prison, 7 years law school, and then spend the next 9 years being investigated for a crime that the court had already said, I didn't commit. So that was a very tragic and trying time for me because that was also my livelihood. And, the thought process was, well, if we hold this back, we cannot not give it to him. We can't deny it to him, but we can hold it up. And if we hold this up long enough, maybe he'll do something that would give us the excuse we need to not give him this license at all. But what they didn't realize is that I would have reached for that license from the grave. I would have waited them out another 100 years, if God gave me that longevity. And so ultimately, they had to give me my license. And, I became one of the most sought after attorneys in the entire country. So that was another blessing that God had given me, patience and perseverance. You cannot, absolutely cannot put enough worth and value on patience and perseverance.
And I think your passion and your motivation and dedication and brilliance and all of that just shows because of all of the obstacles that it's simple. I'm sure I don't know most of the obstacles that you face, but there must have been a ton of obstacles, especially fighting from prison. And then I understand at some point it feels like, my opinion, they started to get a little bit worried about you. They offered you a 2 year sent, to reduce it down to 2 years so that you take that, and then it's kind of like, just get out of our hair, do your 2 years and go home. And you're like, oh hell no. Because then that would have meant you not being able to practice law.
At the time that happened, I wasn't even thinking at that time about practicing law. I was thinking more about the way they stole 7.5 years of my life from me and the way they made me fight to get it back, knowing that they were wrong the entire time. And so for me, it was more about, I'd rather die in prison than now to give them 2 more years. Obviously, it wasn't the rest of my life. It wasn't a life sentence. It wasn't 7 years. I would have to, do 2 more years. And after doing 7, 2 more years was nothing to get out. But I just could not look myself in the mirror after being the victim, of so much injustice, fighting for so many people in the inside and, and getting relief for them, but then fall on the sword when it came to my own pursuit of justice. And that was just never going to happen. I would rather die in prison. And it's in certain ways, it's a selfish way of thinking because people needed me. People needed me home. And, the family was not the same family, without me. And no family is, when they have people that they love that's gone away, but is not passed. They're just been taken away, but for me, I had to weigh that selfishness in a way where I needed to consider the long-term effect for the family. And when I look back on it, I made the right decision. No, it was selfish in the short term, but for the long term, it was an incredible blessing to the family because I didn't come home a convicted felon. I have TV shows and books, that was something where the family could be proud. And that was something that would have never happened had I fell on the sword. And so while it was a selfish decision in the moment, it was an incredible decision of giving over the long term, because I spent the next decades after that giving back to people, including the people that I love, and making not only my family proud of me, but making a better criminal justice system with my presence. So I wouldn't have changed that decision.
And it's not just your family that are proud of you. We are all proud of you.
Thank you.
Like just such an inspiration. Well, I want to get to the book, but before I get to that, you ran for mayor of New York City in 2021, didn't you?
Yeah, yes,
And
I did.
yeah, you did. That's just amazing. Is it something that you would be looking to pursue again in the future? I'm not sure how it works.
Absolutely. I think ultimately there's a place for me in representing the average citizen, and I don't like to call it politics, because politics has a tinge of corruption that I don't think will ever go away. In its rawest form, it's a servant of the people. It's a position where you represent the will, the needs of the people in ways that benefits them more than it benefits you. And so, in true politics, it doesn't work like that. So that's something that that for as far as my future is concerned, is I'm definitely going to continue to pursue.
That's amazing, and I wish you all the best. And so now I wanna talk about your book. Now, the television series For Life was also obviously inspired by your story, but then the book is much more accurate. It's basically how it went down in your words, and it's actually quite insightful. Can you just talk to us about the book a little bit? In terms of, I don't want to say what inspired it because it's obvious, but in terms of the process of writing the book, and how you felt, through that process.
It was a tedious process, but the book was, especially after the TV show, the book was a necessity, because I'm a firm believer when it comes down to things related to government, that there is an automatic right to know, for the people. And there's some things that the government had done to me, in the system, and taxpayers, the average taxpayer, supported what the government did through their tax dollars, not knowing what was really happening. So they have a right to know. And so this book, one of the reasons why I needed to write this book was because I wanted the public to know the absolute truth. I wanted them to understand, what really happened, how it happened. They needed to know that although I was an individual that was wrongly accused and sent to prison for something I didn't do, I wasn't a perfect person. I was like every human being, every man born of a woman. I had those areas in my personality and some of the decisions that I made that were flawed. And some of that was brought on by my success at such a young age. I was arrogant. I was proud of what I had accomplished. I did not, and in that arrogance, and it wasn't an arrogance in a negative way. It was an arrogance that blinded me to certain realities of life. And I made decisions that I shouldn't have made. I made because I believed in that arrogance that, if I walked a straight line, nothing else around me mattered. If I walked a straight line, it didn't matter who I dealt with, who I talked to, who my friends were. And that arrogance blinded me to the fact that, some of those things made me vulnerable. And as a young Black successful entrepreneur, it not only made me vulnerable, but it made me a target. So, hindsight is always 2020, and I'm a very, very wise man today. So while I would not have changed anything, um, I think the book is important uh, so that people can see what it means to be human and what it means to step back from some of those mistakes and stand up not only as a man, but for the things that are right, not only for yourself, but for other people. And to be able to willing to risk your life for that, for the betterment of mankind. So it's a road that everybody needs to understand um, um, how to travel, because we all have our stories and we all have our pains, our conflicts, our challenges in life. And we all look for ways to move past that. We all look for answers. And I think this book is not only a book of truth, but it's a book full of answers when it comes down to the journey that all human beings take in this life in terms of happiness and looking towards happiness and looking towards success.
Thanks for that. And just talking about sort of the therapeutic process through, you probably went through writing the book. I watched an interview where you'd mentioned that you whilst on the set of For Life, you they'd actually locked the cells and locked you
Yes.
in the cell on set, and that completely obviously sent you to a place that you didn't want to be. But then you
Yeah.
also mentioned the importance of talking about what you've been through and how you didn't really realize that until you went through the process of the production of that series. Did you feel, was there a point during, whilst you were writing the book, that you kind of felt a sort of release, of emotions, good or bad, based on what you were writing and based on what you were speaking in terms of the audible version?
One of the things about Earth's um, living color representation of hell is that when you live in it, when you're literally living in hell, and everyone around you is living that same experience, you're no longer in hell. You're only in hell when you're outside looking in. So for me, when I was living in hell, I was I was so engulfed in survival that I never contemplated the pain that went along with it. And so I got out of prison with my feet still running. Because if you think about what I said before, I went straight into school pursuing a law degree and then spent another 9 years fighting to get the law license. And so I never had time to reflect on my own pain. I spent so much time fighting for myself. It was type of a second nature. Um, and then, and I never talked about it. I mean, it was something, not only did I not talk about it, our family didn't talk about it. We didn't sit down and, and kind of inquire with each other about the destruction that we all experienced individually and as a family. We were so happy that it was over and so engulfed in making things better for the family and all of us moving forward that we let that lay on the floor. But it's something that never goes away. And so, you know, when I was doing the series, the show forced me to engage those experiences as a third person, to look back at what I was going through and to now have the time to reflect on it, where I didn't have the time back then. And so the therapy came in, my ability to grieve for myself, to look back and kind of grieve for that person, that 20-something-year-old kid that spent 7.5 years in prison, um, doing it alone. So yes, it was a very therapeutic process in making the TV show, and obviously the book, but the TV show came first. It was more therapeutic there specifically because I never had to address what I went through with inside myself until I was forced to engage it making the show. And it helped me a lot. It lifted a lot, a lot of weight that I was carrying around, and I had no idea that I was carrying it around.
Wow, and the book as well, I find it's obviously more factual, but then it's happy at times, but then at times it's quite difficult to read.
Yes.
And I can't even imagine having to go through that yourself. Because I remember a part where you were speaking about, I think a prison mate called Maurice,
Yes.
and him basically just being left in solitude in his own filth. And what is the process in correcting all of this sort of treatments, all of this ill treatments of prisoners, and how do you fight that? I mean, where do you begin to fight that?
You know, that kind of treatment, and this is the unfortunate part about it, that you have to begin to fight it inside. And most prisoners have no clue how to do that. And the reason why you have to begin to fight it inside is because that's where it's happening. By the time, information gets out to the street, it's been watered down and changed. But the real tragedy occurs in real time inside prison. And the people who know that it's occurred, who has the information firsthand, are the prisoners. And so those are the ones that the general public and the system believes the least. So it took me as not only a fellow prisoner, but someone that was versed in the law, and versed in the remaining constitutional rights, and human rights that prisoners have, because they don't have the same, obviously, as freemen, but they do have some, and those some requires attention, and they require adherence to the powers that be. And sometimes, and I shouldn't say sometimes, most of the time, when this information doesn't get out to the public the way it should, a culture is created within the prison system that not only breeds that kind of injustice, but also protects it. And so it becomes a way of life within the prison system. The kind of neglect that took place with Maurice, as someone who had severe mental health issues, and was using feces and other extricates to actually harm himself, and sometimes the people around him, and instead of giving him help, like is indicated in the book, they gave him more infractions, more charges, which kept him in there longer, which then increased the mental health issue, until at some point he was going to die. He was going to die one or two ways. Either he was going to kill himself, or something was going to happen. A conflict was going to occur between him and the guards, and they were going to kill him. But one way or the other, he was ultimately going to die if I didn't intervene, because that's usually the way it happens inside prison with mental health with inmate that has mental health issues.
Wow. It's amazing, and I would thoroughly encourage anybody who can get their hands on this book to get it. And if they can't, like me, don't like to read, definitely get the Audible version, because I prefer to listen. So I've actually got the Audible version, so I just kind of close my eyes and listen to it. In terms of the book, who would you encourage to read this book? Who would you say the audience for this book are?
I mean, the audience for this book is anyone that's moving through life with some level of responsibility. I think from the age of 13, where we're just coming in to some of our independence, and above, and there's reasons why I say this, because this is not a book about prison and about prison life. This is a book about overcoming challenges. This is a book about finding oneself. This is a book about having some of the answers to problems in you all the time, and not being able to kind of sink within to find those answers to those challenges and make it through. Most people in life that go through things, they don't have the kind of help that they need. They don't have it. And things get worse for them. And sometimes it seems very hopeless. But there's always hope, and this is motivation, inspiration. There's certain secrets of life in general, and of social economics and social interaction, the knowledge of people, that's extremely important. Because one of the things that you want to always remember, anybody that's moving towards success, that's moving to, how should I say, overcome a challenge or an obstacle, they need somebody. And this is what I mean when I say that. It's not necessarily always that they need somebody to help them, but they're going to go to somebody. None of us live in the world alone. And the understanding of people, the understanding of how we as human beings respond to each other, the things that we look for in each other, the things that intimidate us, and the things that enlighten us, the things that pulls us towards each other. When we have those secrets of humanity, those secrets of being alive and not being in the world alone, when we understand how to move through that process, we tend to get more done in life, and we tend to achieve more, and we tend to be able to move through obstacles a lot easier, because we're not going to move through any obstacles in life alone. We're not going to move through any challenges alone. And so this book has all kinds of secrets. You remember, there's a passage in the book that describes how I actually got out of prison, and that was to convince a police officer on the stand that it was better for him to put himself in jail to tell the truth.
That still amazes me. Sorry. That still amazes me how you actually got to get a police officer to confess on the stand. I mean, like, it's almost like a happy ending, though not so happy. Except for yourself, for the people who wronged you, not a happy ending. I mean, I think there's one committed suicide, one is serving time. So yeah. Sorry to interrupt, but I just want.
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
I just, just to sum that up, this book is for everyone. There's something for everyone from every walk of life to learn from this book about living, about meeting challenges, about overcoming those challenges, and about moving forward to achieve your success in life. It's all there, all the ingredients to everything that anyone would need to know in life, to move through challenges and to succeed is in this book. And so I think it's multidimensional when it comes down to who is the best person or who's the best group of people, to really read this book. Everybody should read this book.
That's amazing. Thank you. So we've got 4 minutes. I wanted to also ask, obviously, with Vox Africa, Pan-African TV station, I know you're doing a lot of great works in America at the moment. Any plans to expand that into the continent at some point?
I love Africa. I've been to Cameroon and I've been to Nigeria. I met the King of Wari when I was in Nigeria, and the reason why I went to both places is because there are certain funds that is set up to go into developing countries, and to fund different projects related to energy and agriculture, infrastructure, and things of that nature. And so, I had the benefit of going in there, to do, to do my part, and in helping build some, refineries and a couple of other things there in Nigeria and in Cameroon. But I haven't been back in a little while, and I can't wait to get back. I mean, my goal is to try to touch every single country that I possibly can in Africa. I loved it there. It's a beautiful, beautiful continent. The country that I went to was extremely ingratiating, welcoming, beautiful people. I just felt at home. I felt, just remember, I was raised in the South, and my great grandmother, who I remember, was born a year after the Civil War. You know, her father and her mother were slaves. And so there was this environment, this warm Southern environment where family and the protection of each other, and the caring for each other was number one in that family. It was just so much warmth and so much love. You know, growing up partially in the South and experiencing my grandmother and her ways of doing things, that Africa reminded me of that. It just reminded me of home, and it reminded me of the warmth and beauty of my grandmother. It was just very inviting and very comfortable. I will be back, and if I'm invited, I will take up any invitation.
I will bear that in mind. I'm actually Nigerian, so it gladdens my heart to hear you speak greatly about my country. So thank you for that, and thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you, hearing from you. Any other things, any other plans that you've got, any other upcoming events that we should look out for?
There's two major things that's going to be coming up. One I'm working with 50. And there's another one that I'm working on with another individual. They're going to be both major. I will be announcing them. I can't do it now, but look out for some pretty interesting announcements coming up the end of the first quarter of next year.
Amazing. I look forward to that. I'm hoping it's going to be for live season 3, because I need more of that series. I've got to tell you, I'm not happy. I finished watching season 2. I scrapped all over the internet looking for any good news of a third season, but I couldn't find any.
We're still fighting for that. We're really still fighting for that.
And I'm going to be praying that happens. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I look forward to speaking to you again in the future about more events and more good work that you're going to be doing. Thank you.
Likewise, and thank you for having me.
That was Isaac Wright Jr. His new book, Marked for Life, is out now in all bookstores. If you're like me and prefer to listen, audible version is also available. Thank you for joining. Thank you for watching. Until next time, goodbye.